May 11, 1945. Okinawa, Radar Picket Station 15. The destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley had been holding position for 18 long hours when dawn rose over the East China Sea. From the bridge, Commander Baron Mullaney scanned the horizon, fully aware of what was coming. For nearly 6 weeks, kamikaze pilots had been tearing through the American fleet with devastating precision. Warships that had endured years of conventional combat were now being obliterated within minutes by suicide attacks. The Navy's official damage control doctrine, created long before anyone imagined that enemy pilots would intentionally crash into ships, was proving powerless against this new and horrifying strategy. What High Command at Pearl Harbor had yet to realize was that across dozens of destroyers, cruisers, and carriers scattered throughout the Pacific, crews were quietly rewriting the rules of survival. In the chaos of battle, they were inventing field modifications and new methods that would soon become the backbone of modern damage control. These improvised techniques would go on to save hundreds of sailors and dozens of ships. But first, they would need to be tested in fire. The kamikaze menace had appeared abruptly in October 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commanding Japan's first air fleet in the Philippines, faced an unwinnable situation. Only 41 operational aircraft stood against the largest naval armada in human history. Conventional airstrikes had achieved nothing. His remaining pilots, young, barely trained, and flying outdated planes, were no match for American veterans equipped with superior aircraft and radar guidance. On October 19, 1944, Onishi put forward a desperate idea: to create special attack units whose pilots would deliberately crash explosive-laden planes into enemy warships. The pilot himself would serve as the guidance system, compensating for poor training and inadequate technology, with direct human control until the instant of impact. Captain Motoharu Okamura, who had advocated such tactics since early summer, immediately volunteered to lead the first missions. On October 25, 1944, the opening organized kamikaze assault targeted the escort carrier USS St. Lo off Samar Island. A single Zero fighter, flown by Yukio Seki, plunged through the flight deck at 10:53 a.m. The bomb exploded inside the hangar bay among fueled aircraft, setting off a chain of violent secondary detonations. Within half an hour, St. Lo had disappeared beneath the waves, taking 113 men with her. That moment confirmed a grim equation: one pilot, one aircraft, one major warship destroyed. Within mere days, Japanese forces expanded kamikaze operations throughout the Philippines, and by November 1944, more than 30 U.S. vessels had been damaged or sunk by these suicide strikes. The Navy's once brilliant layered air defense, which had excelled during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, now faltered for reasons no one had foreseen. Conventional bombers approached in groups at altitude, dropped their payloads, and fled. Easy for radar to detect 70+ miles out. Fighter patrols intercepted them, and anti-aircraft gunners had time to respond. Kamikazes shattered that rhythm entirely. They attacked in small numbers, sometimes alone, making radar tracking unreliable. Flying barely above the waves, they often appeared only seconds before impact. Even when hit, they didn't pull away. Flaming wrecks, still guided by dying pilots, continued forward under sheer momentum, smashing into hulls or superstructures. Each impact carried not only the bomb's explosion, but the full kinetic energy of an aircraft moving over 300 miles per hour, along with hundreds of gallons of fuel that ignited on contact. The combined force produced fires and destruction far beyond anything the Navy's existing systems could contain. The standard doctrine emphasized sealing compartments with watertight doors, using the ship's main fire system to battle blazes, and reinforcing damaged structures. Those methods worked against torpedoes and conventional bombs, but not against kamikazes. These strikes caused multiple fires across decks, ruptured main fire lines, jammed hatches, and ignited gasoline flames that water alone couldn't suppress. The destroyer USS Laffey, a Sumner-class vessel, would soon become the ultimate test case, proving that relentless training and discipline could mean survival even under unimaginable assault. Commander Frederick Julian Becton led her with an intensity forged from personal loss. He had watched his previous ship, the first USS Laffey, go down at Guadalcanal in November 1942. His later command, the USS Aaron Ward, was destroyed by Japanese dive bombers off Guadalcanal on April 7, 1943, leaving 27 dead and 59 wounded. From those experiences, Becton learned that a crew's only real defense lay in preparation that went far beyond the manual. From the day Laffey was commissioned in February 1944, he drove his men through tireless damage control drills. Firefighting exercises were held weekly, sometimes several times in the same week. Sailors were cross-trained so any damage control team could function anywhere on the ship, not just in their assigned zones. He distributed firefighting gear throughout the vessel instead of keeping it locked in designated storage areas, ignoring official procedure but ensuring that when disaster struck, no man would ever be left empty-handed. He ran secondary fire hoses from alternate water sources so the crew wouldn't rely entirely on the main system. He placed foam canisters in advance near gun mounts and in areas where aviation fuel or gasoline fires were most likely to ignite. These adjustments went against official Navy procedure, which required centralized damage control gear stored in specific spaces, but they reflected Becton's combat experience and his assessment of where kamikaze planes were most likely to hit. On April 16, 1945, Becton's preparations were put to their final test. Laffey was stationed at Radar Picket Station 1, 30 miles northwest of Okinawa, the most exposed and dangerous point on the defensive line. At 0830, radar picked up several incoming enemy aircraft. For the next 80 minutes, 22 separate kamikaze attacks struck Laffey. 6 planes crashed directly into the destroyer. 4 bombs hit her. Fires broke out in 5 areas at once. The forward fire main was destroyed. The after-engine room flooded, and steering control was lost. Yet Laffey remained afloat. Damage control teams battled fires that by all rights should have destroyed the ship, using methods and equipment arrangements that Becton had established through continuous training. When the main fire line failed, crews switched to backup hoses connected to alternate pumps. When gasoline fires erupted near gun mounts, foam was immediately available because Becton had already placed it there based on tactical analysis. When flames threatened the forward magazine, crews flooded it through emergency pumps tested during earlier drills. The steel plating and reinforcements that Becton's crew had added around key fuel lines and ammunition spaces contained several fires long enough for repair teams to extinguish them before they spread. By 1,000 hours, Laffey was still afloat and still fighting. She lost 32 men and 71 were wounded, but the ship neither sank nor exploded. Against 6 direct kamikaze impacts and 4 bomb hits, training and preparation had kept her alive. Commander Becton's after-action report described in detail how his crew performed during the attack, carefully recording how rigorous training and equipment placement had contributed to survival. Within a few days, the report reached Rear Admiral Calvin Durgan, commander of the escort carrier group supporting the Okinawa campaign. Durgan quickly recognized that Becton's approach offered practical solutions to problems shared across the entire fleet. Analysis of many kamikaze incidents revealed a consistent pattern of improvisation and adaptation among Pacific crews. On the carrier USS Franklin, which had survived a devastating attack on March 19, 1945, damage control teams discovered that normal firefighting procedures were ineffective against aviation fuel fires. The Franklin's War Damage Report, completed by the Bureau of Ships in September 1946, recorded that surviving crewmen organized improvised fire teams using whatever equipment was still working after the first explosions. The ship's emergency diesel fire pump, started manually after power failed, provided water pressure that ultimately prevented total loss. The cruiser USS Santa Fe came alongside in a controlled collision, transferring hoses, foam, and manpower, while also evacuating the wounded. The firefighting methods Franklin's crew developed over 10 hours of combat became essential case studies at damage control schools after the war. The Bureau of Ships' final report recommended many improvements based on those lessons. Among them were positioning more hoses throughout ships, providing portable pumps as emergency backups, strengthening foam systems for fuel fires, and adding quick access panels in armored doors to allow escape if main exits jammed. These suggestions came directly from observing Franklin's improvised responses during the disaster. On destroyers assigned to radar picket duty, crews began welding extra steel plates around gun stations and bridge areas, although official policy required Bureau of Ships approval for any alteration that could affect weight or balance. Picket destroyer crews under constant kamikaze threat welded the armor anyway, using scrap steel taken from damaged ships. The extra protection absorbed fragments and heat from near misses, keeping gunners alive and weapons operational longer during heavy attacks. At repair bases in Ulithi Atoll, Navy construction battalions and civilian shipfitters devised rapid repair methods that broke from official practice but returned ships to service in days rather than months. Normally, damaged sections had to be cut out and replaced with new steel made to exact specifications and approved by engineers. Seabees at Ulithi instead cut patches from wrecked ships, shaped them with torches and hammers, and welded them into place with whatever material was available. The results were crude but effective. Those improvised repairs held under battle conditions and kept ships in action when every vessel was needed. Specific technical changes included routing secondary fire mains differently from primary ones, so a single hit couldn't disable all firefighting lines, and installing extra foam stations near aviation fuel storage and refueling points for faster fire control. They welded steel plating around exposed fuel and hydraulic lines in sections where fragments from near misses frequently caused fires. Portable gasoline-powered pumps were positioned as emergency backups whenever electrical power failed. These improvised modifications shared several defining traits. They were created by sailors with first-hand combat experience who knew exactly where damage was most likely to occur and which systems would fail first. They often broke official regulations or lacked approval from shore-based engineers. Yet under combat conditions, they worked. Ships arriving at Okinawa during late May and June 1945 incorporated many of the same modifications earlier crews had devised under fire. Damage control units trained using methods developed by crews like Laffey's, while repair bases stockpiled the necessary materials to install these proven improvements quickly. The Navy's response to the kamikaze onslaught became an example of rapid institutional learning under extreme pressure. The Bureau of Ships investigation into kamikaze damage, completed in late 1945, revealed that vessels with the highest survival rates were those whose crews had already implemented field modifications before attacks began. Examining the damage to dozens of ships, the report concluded that readiness, training, and the placement of equipment determined survival far more reliably than armor thickness or ship size. The numbers spoke for themselves. Between April and June 1945, kamikaze pilots launched over 1,900 separate attacks during the Okinawa campaign. They sank 36 ships and damaged another 368, killing 4,900 American sailors and injuring 4,800 more. Yet most vessels struck by suicide planes remained afloat. The margin between survival and destruction often came down to mere minutes. Could fire parties reach and contain flames before they spread to ammunition magazines? Could backup systems keep water pressure and power when the primary ones failed? Could crews improvise repairs using whatever tools and materials they had? Ships whose crews had anticipated these problems and prepared accordingly survived at far higher rates than those that depended solely on the manual. The experience of USS Hugh W. Hadley on May 11, 1945, illustrated both the power of training and the limits of preparation when facing overwhelming assault. Commander Baron Mullaney had drilled his men relentlessly in damage control and anti-aircraft tactics since the destroyer's commissioning in November 1944. For 95 minutes that morning, Hadley and the destroyer Evans faced wave after wave of Japanese aircraft in one of the war's most violent kamikaze attacks. Hadley's gunners shot down 23 enemy planes, a record number of kills in a single engagement that still stands. The crew's discipline and training kept their weapons firing despite heavy damage. Combat air patrols directed by Hadley's fighter control team brought down even more attackers before they reached the destroyers, but the sheer volume of aircraft eventually broke through. 4 kamikazes and 1 bomb struck Hadley directly, killing 30 sailors and wounding 67 others. Fires swept across the decks. Flooding spread through the engineering compartments, and the fantail began to settle in the sea. Commander Mullaney ordered all but 50 men into life rafts, keeping only the most essential damage control teams aboard to contain the blazes and prevent the destroyer from breaking apart. Those remaining teams fought tirelessly to keep the ship alive. They isolated flooding by securing watertight compartments and doors. They used portable pumps to battle fires when the main system failed. Through determination and technical skill, they preserved enough buoyancy for tugboats to tow the crippled vessel to Yashima anchorage. Though Hadley survived, her damage was too severe for combat restoration. She was towed back to the United States, decommissioned in December 1945, and scrapped 2 years later. Her crew received the Presidential Unit Citation for their actions on May 11th, while Commander Mullaney was awarded the Navy Cross. The ship's survival proved that even under the most extreme assault, well-trained and resourceful damage control teams could prevent total loss. The innovations that emerged during the Kamikaze campaign became lasting elements of naval doctrine. Post-war training incorporated lessons from ships like Laffey, Franklin, and Hadley. The idea that equipment placement should reflect tactical necessity rather than administrative regulation became a permanent rule. These once improvised field practices eventually formed the foundation of modern naval design. Collective protection systems offering redundant firefighting capability evolved directly from the backup hose networks rigged during the Okinawa battles. Automatic foam systems for aviation fuel storage areas originated from improvised carrier techniques. Modern damage control instruction, emphasizing fast reaction and tactical adaptability, continues the philosophy that survival depends on skilled, intelligent sailors applying sound judgment, not merely following manuals. The Navy's Bureau of Ship Statistical Review, completed in 1998, confirmed the very conclusions first recorded in 1945. Ships with highly trained and proactive damage control teams survived kamikaze strikes at far greater rates than those that depended on minimal crews and standard routines. The study reviewed 212 vessels hit by kamikazes during the Okinawa campaign. 36 were lost, while 176 managed to stay afloat. The ships that survived had, on average, twice as many sailors assigned to damage control, conducted drills 3 times as often, and implemented field modifications at roughly double the rate of those that went down. The Navy's transformation during the kamikaze crisis showed a remarkable ability to learn quickly under pressure. The fleet adapted to an entirely new form of warfare by granting commanders and crews the freedom to create their own practical solutions. This shift required recognizing that official manuals were sometimes insufficient, and that experience in combat often produced better answers than any headquarters could prescribe. Commander Frederick Julian Becton, who led Laffey through her ordeal on April 16th, later retired as a Rear Admiral in 1966 after an exceptional career. Throughout his service, he emphasized that Laffey's survival resulted from the crew's discipline, training, and readiness that went well beyond standard expectations. Becton's insistence on rigorous drills, on placing equipment according to tactical judgment, and on cross-training every sailor became the model for future destroyer operations. Modern Navy damage control training still uses Laffey's experience as a core case study, proving that foresight, preparation, and flexible thinking decide survival when facing unexpected threats. The sailors who endured Okinawa became living repositories of hard-earned knowledge that would shape the post-war fleet. Many continued their service for decades, passing on those lessons to new generations of damage control experts. They made sure that the knowledge bought with blood would never be forgotten. Others returned to civilian life but carried with them an understanding that the best organizations allow people closest to the problem to design the solution. The legacy of the kamikaze battles extends far beyond particular tools or technical fixes. It established a broader truth that successful organizations learn quickly from experience, trust their people to act under pressure, and incorporate those lessons into doctrine without delay. The clearest measure of that success lay in the survival statistics. Despite nearly 1,900 kamikaze sorties over 10 months, Despite 57 ships lost and more than 400 damaged, the U.S. Pacific Fleet remained fully operational. The Japanese never delivered the decisive blow they had hoped for. The fleet absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any earlier navy and still continued to fight. This endurance was built on countless acts of preparation, courage, and initiative, proof of a collective determination to prevail. In the end, it was human adaptability and resolve that decided the outcome. Not superior machinery alone, not sheer numbers or resources, but the willingness to learn, adjust, and improvise under unimaginable pressure made survival possible. These traits reflected the core of American military culture: confidence in individual initiative, the belief that sailors must think independently, and the understanding that those in combat know best what combat demands. The men who lived through Okinawa proved that preparation saves lives, that questioning flawed procedures is a duty, and that true professionalism means improving what doesn't work. Their example still defines modern naval damage control, embedded in training that prizes flexibility, ingenuity, and the expectation that sailors will think for themselves when conditions demand it. Above all, their legacy reminds us that wars are not won solely through technology or grand strategy, but by ordinary people who refuse to surrender, who find ways to endure the impossible, and who keep fighting even in fear and exhaustion. The fleet withstood the Kamikazes because American sailors paired technical skill with creative thinking, because leaders like Frederick Beckton trained their crews beyond regulation, and because damage control teams across the Pacific invented practical solutions to new dangers. The mechanics, welders, and firemen improvising under fire at Okinawa sought no glory. They fought to survive and to save their shipmates. They found ways to battle flames, contain destruction, and keep vital systems alive using whatever methods they could. They passed their knowledge on so others would have a better chance. They drilled harder than required. They modified their ships to fit real combat conditions. They acted on necessity, not merely on authorization. That mindset, the spirit of practical adaptation in the face of chaos, remains their greatest legacy. More than any single tool or method, it established the enduring principle that an effective navy depends on sailors who can think, adjust, and solve problems independently when the moment demands it.